Hello everyone and welcome once again to GistF TV, the home of premium Nollywood drama, the platform where we don't just gist, we dissect, we unveil, and we bring you the emotional, unfiltered heartbeat behind the scenes of the industry you love. Before we dive into this intense and deeply shocking revelation, make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on your notifications, and sit tight, because what I am about to tell you today is the kind of gist that doesn't just trend, it shakes the very foundation of a movie set. What happened today between Pearl Watts and Bryan Okwara has left an entire production confused, embarrassed, divided, and emotionally drained. And the craziest part is that it all started with something so small, so trivial, so harmless, that nobody expected it to escalate into the dramatic storm that now has Nollywood on fire. The set in Asaba was peaceful that morning. The weather was cool, the director was in a great mood, the crew had arrived earlier than usual, and Pearl was already sitting with her script, quietly rehearsing her lines like she always does. She had always been known as one of the calmest, most respectful rising stars in the industry. Soft-spoken, humble, quick to smile, always prepared. Everyone on set loved working with her because she never complained, never arrived late, never caused trouble, and never brought unnecessary energy to the location. Bryan arrived about 20 minutes after her. Tall, confident, handsome, and carrying that unmistakable aura of someone who knows he is not just talented but experienced. People always described Bryan as someone who carried years of acting like a badge of honor. He wasn't rude. He wasn't loud. But he had presence. A presence that often made younger actors nervous. The scene of the day was an emotional confrontation between their characters, the kind of scene that demanded tension, power, and raw expression. The director wanted it done in one take if possible, and so he asked both actors to rehearse together, privately, before stepping in front of the cameras. They began the rehearsal in a small section of the compound. Pearl held her script gently, reading her part with sincerity, sinking into the character. Bryan stood a few feet away, delivering his lines, pacing slowly like someone preparing for a powerful monologue. But halfway through the practice, Pearl noticed that he reversed two lines, mixing them up in a way that slightly affected the flow of her response. It wasn't a big mistake. It wasn't something dramatic. The director had actually mentioned the correction earlier in the morning during the briefing. So Pearl, softly and politely, said something that multiple eyewitnesses confirmed was not disrespectful or harsh. She simply said, "Bryan, I think those two lines were swapped earlier." The director said it's the other order. She wasn't rude. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't correct him with attitude. She didn't embarrass him. She only repeated what the director had already said. But the moment her words landed, something in Bryan's expression changed. He stopped talking midline. He turned slowly toward her. His face tightened. His breathing changed. Crew members watching from the side claimed they immediately sensed tension in the air. He stared at Pearl for a few seconds, then said, in a firm but irritated tone, "You don't get to correct me. I have been doing this before you entered this industry." The words hit Pearl with the weight of a stone. She froze completely. She hadn't expected that response. The crew hadn't expected it. And that moment of silence where nobody moved, nobody breathed, nobody blinked, stretched into something long and heavy. The director, who had been reviewing props a few meters away, immediately rushed over, sensing that something had gone very wrong. He asked what happened, but Bryan had already begun removing his mic, pulling off the tape on his shirt with sharp movements. He dropped the script on the nearest chair and said loudly enough for several people to hear, "I won't be disrespected by upcoming actresses." People around him gasped. Someone said, "Jesus." Another person covered their mouth. The makeup artist dropped a brush. The sound guy turned around slowly, unsure if he had heard correctly. Pearl felt her throat tighten. Witnesses said her eyes instantly glistened with tears, but she tried to blink them back, trying to remain composed. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her voice had simply disappeared under the weight of humiliation. The director tried to calm Bryan down, telling him there was no disrespect in correcting a misplaced line. But Bryan was already walking away, heading toward the exit with long, angry steps. He didn't look back. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He just left. The moment he exited the gate, silence washed over the entire location. It was the type of silence that makes even birds pause in the air. People were frozen, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Pearl took a small step backward. Her hands were shaking. She pressed her fingers to her face as if trying to hold herself together, but her control cracked. Tears spilled. Not loud crying. Not dramatic sobbing. Just quiet, heartbreaking tears that exposed how deeply hurt she was. Sonia Uche, who had been reviewing her script near the wardrobe tent, immediately rushed over to Pearl. She put her arm around her, guiding her gently to a corner behind one of the vehicles. The makeup artist followed. A few crew members followed. They surrounded her, trying to comfort her, trying to tell her she had done nothing wrong. But Pearl couldn't even speak. She kept shaking her head, trying to process why such a small correction had turned into such a public embarrassment. One of the costume assistants whispered, "Why would he talk to her like that? What did she do?" Another replied, "He must be dealing with something else." That reaction wasn't normal. But as the minutes passed, the whispers turned into theories, and the theories soon turned into the kind of gist that spreads like wildfire. Some people said Bryan was already having a bad day. Others said he was feeling insecure because Pearl's popularity had been skyrocketing recently. Some said he felt threatened, others said he felt disrespected, others claimed there had been tension between them from the beginning of the project. Nobody knew the truth. But the one thing everyone agreed on was that Pearl didn't deserve the public humiliation. When the producers arrived on set almost 20 minutes later, the tension was still in the air. They found the director pacing. They found the crew whispering. They found Pearl sitting in a chair, her eyes still red, her hands clasped tightly together. Sonia was sitting beside her, patting her back occasionally. The producers asked what happened, and after hearing the summary, they were left speechless. The biggest issue wasn't even the workout. It was the way Bryan had spoken to her, the words he used, and the fact that he had said them loudly enough for half the set to hear. In an industry where reputation, respect, and professionalism mean everything, those words were dangerous. They weren't just words. They were wounds. Meanwhile, outside the set, a few fans who had witnessed Bryan walking out had already posted cryptic messages online. One wrote, "Something just happened on this location or actor stormed out." Another posted a blurry video of Pearl wiping her face with tissues. The blogs grabbed these posts within minutes, and suddenly the internet was buzzing with rumors. Some fans were furious, dragging Bryan for what they called unnecessary ego. One wrote, "Why would he shame her like that? She was only doing her job." Another said, "This type of attitude is why younger actresses get scared to correct mistakes." But there were also fans who defended Bryan, suggesting he had been pushed or overwhelmed or triggered by something unrelated. The debate became louder and louder. Producers called Bryan repeatedly, but he didn't pick up. They sent messages. No response. They even sent the assistant production manager to the hotel where the cast was staying, but he was not in his room. And that silence added another layer of tension. On set, the director had to cancel filming for the rest of the day because the emotional atmosphere was too broken to continue. Pearl insisted she could return to work, but the producer gently told her to rest. Her eyes were swollen, her voice shaky, and her spirit visibly shaken. They didn't want her performing in that state. Hours passed. And as word spread deeper into Nollywood, more people began calling the set, asking questions, seeking details. The gist had escaped the gate, traveled through the streets, and entered the wider industry like wildfire. Some actors expressed support for Pearl privately. Some crew members said what happened should never ever occur again. Others said this incident might change the dynamic between Bryan and younger actresses going forward. Some hot-tempered fans even demanded the producers replace Bryan entirely. But even with all the noise, the deepest sting remained in Pearl's heart. Those who were close to her said she kept replaying his words in her mind, wondering what she had done wrong, wondering why he reacted that way, wondering how something so small became the earthquake that shook an entire set. Whether Bryan will return to the production or whether the producers will take a drastic decision remains unknown. But one thing is certain. Nollywood has not heard the last of this story. This single moment has opened a conversation about respect, ego, insecurity, and the invisible battles actors fight behind the scenes. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the latest explosive drama shaking Nollywood today. Stay tuned to GistF TV because I promise you, this story is far from over.